Well, welcome everybody. I'm Melissa Schlag, climate advocate for Save the Sound. We're so excited to have you guys here and our amazing panel today to talk Greening the Ghetto, Majora Carter's TED Talk. I'll first start with some housekeeping logistics. This is going to be recorded, so you can watch it later on or send it to friends who've missed it or watch it again. I'll ask that everyone stay muted. You're going to come on as muted, and I'll ask you to stay that way through the end. We will have a question and answer at the end of the discussion. And just to keep it easy, we'll ask you to put your questions in the chat box, which is on the bottom of your screen, and just click on that and write your question there, and we'll get to it at the end. And then we'll also ask that you, if there is time to do live questions, we'll ask you to use the raise the hand feature. But we feel the chat, because there's so many people on this webinar, that we ask you to use the chat preferably. Also, I forgot to tell you where you can find this recording, and actually all of our recordings of our past webinars and our film clubs. It's savethesound.org/stay engaged. And that also has a link to our archives of all of our older events. And just a little bit about Save the Sound. For those of you who don't know about us, we're a nonprofit based in Connecticut and New York, and we do a little bit of everything, from legislative advocacy and legal action to engineering, environmental monitoring, and hands-on volunteer efforts. We restore and protect all that impacts the Long Island Sound region and its environment, from rivers and shorelines to wetlands and forests, from the air we breathe to the waters of the Sound itself. And we just celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. So we're doing a lot of exciting stuff. Thank you. So let me introduce the panelists, and then I'll give a little bit of a brief history of what environmental justice is in the United States and Connecticut and New York specifically. So we have kind of a backdrop for our discussion. So our panelists, this is an amazing panel. I'm so proud of these guys to have them with us. So first we have Maggie Scott Greenfield. She's the executive director of the Bronx River Alliance and the Bronx River Administrator for the New York City Parks. She brings extensive experience in managing collaborations among government agencies and community groups, and substantial experience with long-range planning and urban issues. She's an urban planner and environmental scientist who comes to the Bronx River Alliance from the federal transportation sector, where she specialized in environmental planning. She earned a Bachelor's of Science in Public Health and Environmental Science from the University of North Carolina and a Master's in City Planning from MIT. She lives in the Bronx with her husband and children. Next, we have Wildaliz Bermúdez. Wildaliz is an environmentalist and an elected official with the Hartford Court of Common Council and is now in her second term. She served as the chair of the Parks and Public Works Committee, where she's hosted community conversations and demonstrations on environmental justice issues. In 2019, Trinity College honored her as one of the 50 for the next 50. And in 2018, she was named one of Connecticut Magazine's 40 under 40 for her work in the community. She has a master's in environmental science from Puerto Rico and from the University of Puerto Rico and a bachelor's from Trinity College. She resides in Hartford with her husband and her daughter. Next, we have Brent Peterkin, who actually grew up in the Bronx and spent time as a youth doing restorative ecological work in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. Brent is the first full-time executive director of the merged organization Gather New Haven, which is New Haven Land Trust merged with them. And after almost 6 years as a statewide director for Project Longevity, a nationally recognized program of the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, focused on reduction of gun violence in Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven. Brent also served on the Governor's Youth and Urban Violence Commission and the Bridgeport Mayor's Initiative for Reentry Affairs. Previously, Brent was also a Zoom Policy Fellow in the Office of the Governor, working in support of the Office of Early Childhood, where he focused on parent engagement and fatherhood development. He also worked as a Yale University-based global anti-poverty initiative and supported at-risk high school students with emotional, behavioral, and learning disabilities in Yonkers, New York. Next, we have Alex Rodriguez, who is a community organizer at the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. And as an organizer, Alex engages and builds relationships with a multiracial collaborative of activists at the grassroots level to advocate for sustainability, environmental justice, and voting rights. And last, but definitely not least, we have our own Nicole Davis. Nicole is the watershed coordinator for Save the Sound's ecological restoration team. She's currently coordinating the implementation of projects from the watershed plans for New Haven Harbor and green infrastructure work in Connecticut. She has managed Save the Sound's residential and edible rain garden programs and is working on a project to expand the Mill River Trail through southern Fairhaven and convert an abandoned dead-end street into a parklet. But now, before we jump into the actual panelist questions about the film, I wanted to give a very brief overview and history of the environmental justice, what it really means in the US, Connecticut, and New York, that might not be familiar with some of you. And I'll show you some visuals too. So I'll share my screen now. Go. Okay. I emphasize brief because when you really look at the dates, it's pretty sad that it's been so brief. 1994, the US EPA instituted its first environmental justice language based on an executive order. That order directs each executive department and agency to make achieving environmental justice part of its mission. But there's no mandate in statutes. So it's right now it's pretty words. And the EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws and policies. Connecticut's environmental justice. So in 1993, we instituted our first equity policy, and that definition is: no segment of the population should, because of its racial, ethnic, or economic status, bear a disproportionate share of the risks and consequences of environmental pollution, or be denied equal access to environmental benefits. In 2008, Connecticut passed an additional law that requires applicants who are seeking a permit for a new or expanded facility, such as a power plant or a sewage treatment facility, that is proposed in an environmental justice community, to file an environmental justice public participation plan, which allows the community, among other things, to participate. In 2020, we did start work on an additional environmental justice bill, but of course that was derailed by the COVID epidemic. This map pretty much says it all in a picture. I don't want to say a pretty picture, but those little yellow dots are the plants that are polluting plants, or with criteria air pollutants is what they call it. And those dark blue areas are the minorities of the communities. You can see the correlation between where those plants are sited and where the largest population and distressed communities are. And this will all be as part of the recording, so you can take a look at it closer when you watch it again. This is the child asthma rates by household income. And you can see the tallest bar here are the poorest kids. This also paints a picture of that we need to do a lot better. New York's law actually is getting a lot better as of this year, but their definition is: environmental justice is the fair and meaningful treatment of all people, regardless of race, income, national origin, or color, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. They actually first instituted their first environmental justice coordinator in 1999, but they had no statute, regulation, or executive order about environmental justice. In 2003, the DEC officially adopted the environmental justice policy, but it failed to follow through on most of the recommendations. This year, they did pass the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. It got headlines across the country for being very progressive, or the most progressive clean air policies and goals. But it does create a permanent environmental justice advocacy group within the DEC, plus an interagency coordination council that will make sure state agencies treat New Yorkers fairly when it comes to enforcement of environmental policies. We do have in Connecticut, we have our Governor's Council on Climate Change, which is working hard on the environmental justice issue, and some of our panelists might talk about that later. If not, I can definitely talk about it. That's just a very brief history and overview of the definition of environmental justice and what these two states are doing and not doing. It's clear that we need to do more. But you've heard enough from me, so let's go to our panelists. First, we have Maggie. and she's boots on the ground in the Bronx. So Maggie, my question for you is, can you give us an update on how it's going in the Bronx and where you are today with sustainability and development?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. It was a real pleasure to be invited to join this panel and to have the opportunity to rewatch the video. It's been many years since I had watched Majora's TED Talk. Majora is a force of nature and really truly an environmental justice leader, both nationwide and here in the Bronx. She was also one of the founders of the Bronx River Alliance, in addition to many other things she's done in her career. So the park that she developed, the story about her dog and her dog leading her down an abandoned street end that was full of garbage, and lo and behold, she had never known there was a river there, but it led her to the river that was the Bronx River. And that patch of land is now Hunts Point Riverside Park, as she described in the film. And she was married in that park. And I was honored to be able to join her for those festivities many moons ago. The story of what's been happening in the Bronx is there's a lot of bright spots, and I'm going to start by talking about those bright spots, and I'm going to touch on some of the things that maybe we haven't made as much progress on. Oh, and Majora is here. So maybe Majora would like to say a few words, but I'll just say a few things first, which is that we've made a lot of progress on our greenways, which Majora talked about in the video. The South Bronx Greenway, the Bronx River Greenway. We've taken abandoned street ends, concrete plants, former manufactured gas plants, turn them into green space. So both doing the brownfield remediation to clean up those sites, which is often difficult and expensive and takes a very long time, but both transforms those spaces from industrial lots or abandoned spaces into green spaces for our community. And the fact that they're waterfront spaces is really significant also because it creates a green buffer for our communities to be able to better withstand the impacts of climate change and the next storm surge. And knowing that if there is storm surge, that at least some of these lots are being cleaned up, because the implications and the concerns around storm surge and contaminated land really does raise a lot of questions. We've done a lot of ecological restoration in partnership with lots of different players throughout the Bronx and the city and the state. So Department of Environmental Conservation has been a partner with us on some of these projects to restore salt marsh, to bring back riparian forests, to bring back wildlife such as the alewife herring has been a real species that we've been working on bringing back, both through fish passage projects and reintroduction, fish releases. We weren't able to do it this spring. We actually do bring down fish from Connecticut, from Bride Brook, every year in partnership with Connecticut DEEP. We were not able to do that this year because of COVID. It was, we were very sad about that, but we look forward to restarting that again next year. And I would just say also, I think really one big asset that we have here in this borough, in addition to the beautiful people who live here, is our nonprofit community. We have a very strong, active nonprofit community, many environmental justice organizations like the Point, CDC, Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice, who are part of a larger coalition called the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And so, those are all really good things. We are still struggling with many of the things that Majora described in the video. The health metrics are still really a concern, the air quality, the water quality. We are still working on making improvements to those. It's a long game anyway to do those things. And it takes many, many years of concerted effort and community pressure and really public advocacy to make those things happen. Anyway, I'm just going to wrap it up there. I've probably already spoken for 3 minutes, and I'll turn it over now. If we're able to let Majora say a few words, that would be cool.
I think she just shot us a message saying that she wasn't able to stay.
Okay.
Laura, correct me.
Let me just say hi to Majora.
Cool.
Hey guys, I did just want to just say thank you for all that you've been up to all these years. And hello, Maggie.
Hi.
We were so excited when we saw you guys were still out there doing your thing. And I just remember early on the support that you provided and the confidence that you gave us early in the beginnings of our work on the Bronx River, which for me started in the late 90s. And literally, like, your vote of confidence in our ability to actually be there to support our community at the beginnings of the Bronx River Working Group, which turned into, of course, the Bronx River Alliance, which the amazing Maggie now leads. And so we're super excited about all that we were able to build on. And just, I'm grateful that organizations like yours are still there. And now I do have to go, but yeah, we were super excited to see that all this was happening. So keep strong and healthy.
Thank you so much, Majora. We're so honored to have you join us.
All right, take good care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for everything. Well, that was great. Nice little surprise. Thank you, Maggie. It's great to catch up with everything going on down there. And thank you for all your work. All right, let's shift to Connecticut's capital. And we will ask Wildaliz Bermúdez, who's an environmental leader and grassroots activist. Can you tell us what you're seeing in Connecticut's capital?
Hi, everybody. This is Wildaliz. So a lot of what's happening, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you, but a lot of what we saw play out in that TED Talk is exactly what's been happening here in Hartford and in so many of our cities in Connecticut. So if we look at, the overall composition of Connecticut, we have 169 towns. And if we look at the composition of our cities, there's like approximately 7 of them. You want to factor in like the New Britain and others, then you're talking about 12 different municipalities. And so we're all in the same boat in that if you look at Hartford, the majority of our population is Black and brown. So 80% of our population is identifies as Black and brown community. Our overall median income doesn't exceed $29,000 a year. And so when you look at that chart that you presented earlier, which was a fantastic chart that correlated between the asthma rates and poverty, that's Hartford. That is what's happening in Hartford. That's what's been happening in Hartford and continues to be a major problem and a major challenge, environmental challenge in our communities. So not only is it bad enough that we have 4 major highways that cut through Hartford, through our city, and also add on to that, we have the trash incinerator that takes the trash of over 69 different surrounding towns. And on top of that, you have other determinants of health that are challenging because of the environmental problems and the contamination that we see from our air, our horrible quality of air, and then how it correlates to asthma rates. And then also with that, the lack of access to green spaces. So some of you might be saying, well, that's very strange because Hartford has so many great parks. But if you look at the actual city budget, and on City Council, we just wrapped up approving the new fiscal year budget, which officially starts today, July. We see our budget as a priority, what we prioritize as a community. And one of the things that we saw play out was how when you're looking at parks in Hartford, there are more funds allocated in our city budget to the golf parks compared to other parks. And all of you here who are watching this are environmentalists, and so the impacts that golf courses have. And just when you're talking about the amount of water and the irrigation system and the costs to run golf courses. And so bottom line, here we are amidst a pandemic and our own residents, if you look at the composition of our golf membership at these 2 golf courses, 80% of the golf membership are not Hartford residents. They're people who live outside of Hartford. And so the city has invested time and time again, and you can look at it from fiscal year to fiscal year. If I have some of the numbers here just to put things into perspective. Fiscal year 2018, the city expense for the golf courses was $2 million. Fiscal year 2019 it was $1 $1,883,000, and so on and so forth. And so every year we are investing more into these golf courses versus investing more in recreational centers, investing more in the access to other parks that we have. One of them that I wanted to touch upon was Batterson Park. Batterson Park is a beautiful park that has access to a natural body of water. It is owned by the city of Hartford. It has been in the city of Hartford's possession for over 40 years. And it is a park that has been closed. So when the mayor, when our mayor Luke Bronin came into office in 2016, that park was closed. So fast forward, this past year, City Council unanimously voted to approve to allow for a friends group, conservation group, to be able to be the stewards and to help fundraise for that park to be open, with the support of state elected officials, and also with the support of other mayors, because it just so happens that that park is located in between 3 different towns, including the town of New Britain and Farmington. And we found out that the mayor said no to the proposal. And so when we're looking at prioritizing our use of space, we really have to take a close look at those numbers and who we are prioritizing. So right now, what I can tell you is that we are prioritizing people who don't live in Hartford versus those who are. Unfortunately, that's the reality of Hartford, whether you look at the park system or whether you look at the trash incinerator.
Thanks, Wildaliz. Thanks for all your work, for pushing for these issues. We need voices like yours across the state and in New York to keep this going. I think it's a good segue to our next speaker, who, if you think about the grassroots movement, we forget what it really means from the ground up. It's the people on the ground and doing all of this behind the scenes work that don't get a lot of the credit. And Alex Rodriguez is one of those. He's a young activist, working hard for years at this, bringing more people to the table. So my question to you, Alex, is with all of your experience as a young activist, what are you seeing in environmental justice communities in Connecticut, and how important is it for people to get involved?
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you for the question. And thank you and Laura for inviting me to take part in this discussion. I think I first want to open with in 2017 was really, the time, 2016 going into 2017 was the time I entered the movement. I've always been interested in American government and civics, but I really didn't have anything I cared about until Niagara Water Bottling Company came to Bloomfield to excavate for our public water supply. It was clear to me at that moment that climate change and corporate greed were linked. It really inspired me to get together with my friends and start speaking truth to power, going in front of the MDC with Bloomfield activists and other nearby activists protesting the sale of water, protesting the water bottling plant that was soon to enter Bloomfield. Unfortunately, we couldn't stop the water bottling plant from being built, but that was the first time that really became clear to me that our public resources are under attack because of corporate greed, and the effects that it has on communities of color and low-income communities is just disastrous. They are already suffering. Unfair conditions as it is, be it societal or economic. And two areas that have stuck out to me, two events that stuck out to me are in Bloomfield, in New Britain and in Waterbury. In New Britain, there was a proposal to mine 74 acres of protected watershed land owned by the city of New Britain. But this land is technically located in Plainville, but still nonetheless, this is protected watershed land that is embodying New Britain, Plainville, and Southington. And for 2 years, New Britain residents were calling against the proposal that Mayor Stewart should not extract this protected watershed land because of the drought that was going on at the time, and because of fear of pollution of the local water supply. It took a robust public participation process. It took a robust group of civically engaged individuals to really push back against this. It took regional activists from Southington first to push the town council to rule against the sale of protected watershed land, because they conveyed to New Britain activists and Plainville activists that this deal was not in the community's best interests. They had already had experience with the Tilcon mining company that was coming, that made this proposal in the first place. So Southington had to turn down the proposal first, followed by Plainville, followed by New Britain. And so luckily, the sale of protected watershed land in these areas was struck down. However, another example of environmental injustice is Waterbury. There is a waste hauling plant there called F&G, and F&G is responsible for dealing with the recyclables in the area. This is a facility that's located in the south end of Waterbury, a predominantly Latino area, and whenever a company is seeking to do business, to expand a facility or set up a new facility, there is an intense permitting process. And so they had to seek a permit from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And they were supposed to make sure that fair notice went out to the community members in a bilingual approach, because there was a significant Spanish-speaking population. However, that was not done. And so eventually this plant was expanded upon, and it was very unfortunate. This is an area of the city that is suffering from the whole city of Waterbury suffers from 19 hazardous permits, and that has disastrous effects on the community's public health. And so that's why it's so important that we have a strong environmental justice policy in the state. It seems like these big polluters get away with just going around DEP's environmental quality policy. And so, I really want to bring it back to why it's just so important to have civically engaged individuals and to really engage communities that are most impacted by pollutants and other societal issues, because we cannot have an equitable society. We cannot have a truly, sustainable society for everybody until we really step up and fight for environmental justice for communities of color and low-income communities. And so I just want to turn everybody's attention to the Governor's Council on Climate Change. The Governor's Council on Climate Change is passing on recommendations to the governor to help implement his executive order calling for carbon neutrality by 2040, but we need to make sure everybody is at the decision-making table. And so if you check out portal.ct.gov or portal.ct.gov/DEEP/climate change, I'll drop the link in the chat. It's really important that we all become a part of this process and pass on recommendations to the council that we believe will bring the most dignity to our communities.
Thanks so much, Alex. I think that drives home the point of accountability. We can have all the pretty laws or pretty policies on the books, but if we don't live those policies, they're pointless. So thanks for all your work and your organizing to help these communities. Well, let's move to New Haven. Next, we have Brent Peterkin. And Brent, as someone who has actually experienced growing up in the Bronx and now works in the greater New Haven area, can you tell us how open space and outdoor safe places are integral to society?
Sure. Thank you all for having me here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be amongst you all, especially as a newbie to the movement, so to speak. So yeah, that is correct. I grew up in the Bronx, lived there for the majority of my life. And during my formative years as a teenager, I was privileged with the opportunity to work at a place called Wade Hill, which consists of several publicly owned horticultural projects, botanical gardens, but there's also a woodland area. The entire property is over 20 acres. And so it took me about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes to get out there for work each way for my commute. But it was like going into a different dimension. You know, unknowingly, I was engaging in activities like forest bathing, where I would walk out into spaces. You can see the New Jersey Palisades and the Hudson River from parts of the property, and I would go deep into the woods and feel as if I belonged there, which was a stark contrast from the concrete and glass that I was accustomed to. And in my neighborhood, where we did have open green spaces, grass, we were prohibited. And so there were actually signages that said, keep off grass, and it was enforced. And so that spurred or created a sense of disconnect. And when we think about green spaces and open spaces, especially in urban environments, that draws my attention to some of the work that I just came out of, which focuses on community level gun violence that's driven by street groups and street gangs. And what we're seeing throughout the country, and what we have been seeing for a while, is the implementation of the policy and practice that is informed by a criminological theory called broken windows. And so the broken windows theory essentially states that in areas where there's blight or an unkept environment, or an environment that looks like as if there's wanton disregard for the environment, whether it's through littering or open lots and things of that nature, short dumping and stuff like that, that tends to breed crime. And so the approach, in part, that was taken in New York City when I was a resident under the administration of Mayor Giuliani, was to focus on trivial crimes. And so that led to higher arrest rates and things of that nature, and other policies that were found to be quite egregious and to a certain extent unconstitutional. That being said, you can utilize green spaces to actually reduce the prevalence of crime in areas. And you can do that by transforming vacant lots, advocating for access to parks, and also things like nature preserves. So one example would be our Pond Lily nature preserves that we manage through Gather New Haven. And I actually did a site tour of the Pond Lily Nature Preserve, which is also formerly the site of the Pond Lily Dam, which was removed a couple of years ago to open up the river so we can have a stream flowing through. And it creates a very tranquil environment, acoustically and also visually. But adjacent to the Pond Lily Nature Preserve is a housing development. And so during my excursion through the nature preserves, I asked a lot of questions about the housing development. And there are areas where there is some dumping. And very basic question that I asked was, to what extent have we engaged this community? Do they even know that what's behind this chain link fence is actually something that they should feel a sense of ownership and access to, and that it's a resource to them? And the answer was inconclusive. And so that sort of draws back to what the previous speakers talked about, as far as how do we inculcate a sense of ownership and advocacy, and that requires aggressive community engagement. But in order for people to advocate for something, they have to have access and appreciation for those same things, right? Whether it's access to or the removal of things that would be harmful for our environment and harmful for our health. And so, for me, I was very fortunate, but my experience was quite the anomaly growing up in the Bronx, and the opportunity that I have to have access to a lot of green spaces. And we have, Van Cortlandt Park, we have the Botanical Gardens in the Bronx, we have things like that, but that's not accessible to everyone. And it's not an environment where you can kind of escape. It's not fully an urban refuge in certain regards. But I think that through aggressive community engagement, especially through grassroots organizations, not just in New Haven, but throughout our cities, and encouraging and facilitating access to nature, and also embracing and participating in urban agriculture, so that people are not only addressing their psychological and spiritual and the community well-being, but also their physical well-being. To me, it's limited to just focus on the tranquility of nature and facilitating access if we're not also being custodians and caretakers of our internal environment and our own bodies. When I worked at Wave Hill, I was taught a lot. My education was rich. It wasn't just, get out there with the weed whacker and remove mugwort all day. They also taught us how to identify plants that are considered invasive species, but also to learn about their medicinal properties, right? And how they can be beneficial for us. And some of these things grow wildly throughout the city of New Haven and at our preserves as well. And so I'll stop there, but that essentially is my take on access to open spaces.
That's wonderful. And I'm glad you brought up Pond Lily. It's something that we worked on starting in 2015, where Save the Sound got an $800,000 funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Natural Resource Conservation Service. And what removing that dam does is it removes the flood risks and restores fish passage, as you mentioned, and habitat for 2.6 stream miles and 76 acres of Connell's pond habitat for herring, eel, and shad. And it's a perfect segue to bring us back to Nicole, who literally her job is to do just that, restore these places, and she'll probably tell us a little bit about Mill River. So I know that in Majora's TED Talk, they talked about green is the new black and the green roofs that they're doing in the Bronx. And how they help not only with climate change, but with stormwater. We also saw the return of, nature to the city and her favorite little butterflies in that video. So Nicole, that brings us back to you. Tell us a little bit about your work with Save the Sound and how the community grassroots action can actually play a big role in actually getting some of these green spaces.
Thanks, Melissa. And thank you to all of my fellow panelists. This has really been great, and there's so much overlap between what Majora was talking about and the work that Alex and Wildaliz and Maggie and Brent are doing and the work that we're doing right here in New Haven. One of the big projects that we're working on right now that really relates to this TED Talk is kind of reclaiming an abandoned roadway in New Haven in the Fairhaven neighborhood and converting it into a park. And the project came about during the Mill River planning process. which was a community-led plan where we worked with people from the headwaters in Cheshire down into Fairhaven to identify projects that could help alleviate impairments within the river. And as part of that, we found this kind of trash-filled roadway, and as Brent had kind of alluded to, the broken window effect. It's an abandoned roadway with bricks across the bottom that people use as a dumping ground, and no matter how much work is done to remove the trash, more trash always ends up there. And just talking to the neighbors, you know, they try to police it and they try to pay attention, but people don't see it as a valuable green space. And that by kind of taking away this uninviting area and turning it into a beautiful park that brings in butterflies and people and the community, you know, it can really have a positive impact, which is what we hope to see there. And that whole idea that green is the new black and that people kind of accept what they're used for. We've talked to kids in that neighborhood and at the local school, and it's that they just kind of accept that this is what their community is and this is what their environment is. You know, we mentioned the Mill River to them, and a lot of people don't even know it's there. Or you say, the river, it's, you know, just a mile from where we're standing. They're like, oh, on the other side of the salt pile or on the other side of the trash heap or where those smokestacks are. So really trying to get people to embrace this as a natural environment and that they're part of the river, and not just it's something somewhere else that's not attainable to them is really important to the work we're doing. And it's really built off a lot of momentum from other nonprofit and activist groups within New Haven and Hamden that kind of started this effort to reclaim the waterfront in Fairhaven and, you know, connect this community that doesn't really have access to green space, and everything that other people have already said and Majora said, that have, you know, higher rates of asthma than the rest of New Haven, fewer trees per capita than the rest of New Haven, and helping them realize that they're connected to this river and it's part of their community, that it's not just an industrial waterfront, that it's their home too. And they really spent a lot of time on the ground talking to the community, working with the business owners to access those right-of-ways, and have been great partners throughout all of this. And stormwater, which is how Save the Sound kind of got involved in this, because stormwater is such an important thing in the work that we do, but also in our environment. You know, most people don't view it as anything more than the rain falls and it goes away down a storm sewer drain. But most of that water ends right back up in our rivers and in Long Island Sound, and it carries everything that we put on the ground with it, be it fertilizer, pesticides, pollutants, broken glass, garbage. And that all goes straight out into our streams. And as it builds up, it becomes less and less inviting to anyone. So helping to get people to realize that what they do has an impact on everything around them is really important. And it's great to see that there's so much work going on around Connecticut, and that we really can be part of the solution. And I'm glad to hear that there's so many activists working on so many problems within the small state, that hopefully together we can make a real impact.
That's great. Thanks so much, Nicole, for all your work. And it's great to actually see these things are tangible things. These aren't just policies or statutes. These are actual things that people can do, see, visit, and make them feel better. So one thing we haven't actually talked about is how all this can connect to jobs and workforce development. So what I'm going to do is Nicole and Maggie both kind of deal with workforce development in their work. And I just want to throw that question out to you gals to maybe talk a little bit about workforce development.
Sure, I can take that up. So, you know, Majora in her talk mentioned the BEST program, the Bronx Environmental Stewards Training Program that she developed at her nonprofit Sustainable South Bronx. And one very cool thing that has happened over the years is that the many people who go through that training program, we then hire onto our conservation crew. We have a Bronx River conservation crew, which, you know, really goes out onto the river every day. There are eyes and ears out there on the river. They lead our on the ground environmental restoration work. They keep the river clear and open for recreational boating. And so our conservation manager and both of our crew leaders have now came up through the BEST program, Majora's program. I think they were maybe in her first cohort, and have been with us ever since for now, you know, over, I think about 15 years, and have become real leaders in the work. I think that's just really great because it also, in addition to just the opportunities that it affords those individuals, it also provides role models for everyone who comes in contact with our work, volunteers who come out and engage with us, maybe do a tree planting or an invasive removal kind of project. They see people who look like them out there leading this work. And it gives a sense that these kinds of career paths are open and possible for people. And we're doing more, we're looking to do more in our work here to kind of work with schools and work with colleges to develop more of that pipeline, particularly for youth in environmental justice communities, to have more exposure to different career paths in the environmental field, and to know kind of, just to hear the stories of people who've come up, risen through the ranks in various ways. And sometimes it's more than just doing the field work, right? It's people who become engineers, people who become, conservation managers, and to have those role models, I think, is really important, and to understand where you can go to do, apprenticeships, internships, advanced study in these topics. I think is something that we are looking to really grow into more as an organization. So it's been something that we've been happy to be a part of, this kind of ecology of nonprofits that are engaged in this work in the Bronx, and to continue kind of trying to move that forward and learn from others about how to build more bridges between youth in these communities and opportunities in the environmental field.
That's wonderful. Nicole, did you want to add anything from the New Haven perspective?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything I can add on top of what Maggie already said, but I'd really just want to echo, it's making those bridges and these connections for kids who grow up in areas that don't have access to green space. I think so many of us take for granted, we don't think anything about going for a hike or a walk in the woods, but if you live in a community where those things aren't close by or aren't accessible, it's not something you think about. So working with high school students, which is something we do a lot with the local high school groups and community groups, just bringing about this exposure that this kind of work exists and this is something that you can do and you can pursue, and giving them kind of that information on who to talk to and who to connect with if it's something to interest them is really huge in environmental justice communities.
That's great. Do any of the other panelists want to add anything about the workforce development?
Yeah, just briefly, I think it was alluded to earlier, as far as opportunities for green collar jobs. And I think if we look at a lot of the communities that I'm familiar with, the opportunity for to earn a living wage, especially at the level of where it's not just a single adult, but single adults with dependents, those prospects are there as well and should be explored. But also just going back to accessing green spaces and what that means for people who look like me or whose skin is of a slightly lighter hue, and ensuring that we're looking at the intersections here as far as the EJ movement and the CJ movements are concerned, and connecting that back to racial justice movements as well, to ensure that we are pursuing these and navigating this journey in an equitable and racially sensitive, and I would say an anti-racist manner as well.
Thanks, Brent. We're good.
And I wanted to add one thing too. For those who are watching and live in suburban towns and are saying, well, that's, it's happening somewhere else. It's happening in Hartford. It's happening in other cities. It's great that there are people in those cities that are fighting for that, but how can I actually get involved? And at the end of the day, and it was mentioned a little earlier, but everything truly and really is interconnected. The fact that we have the trash incinerator plant in Hartford, in poor communities and in places like Waterbury, is very interconnected to your own reality. And the decisions that were made to put and place those incinerator and waste facility sites in those locations. And so from what I've attended so many meetings, as have everybody else, right? And oftentimes it's like saying, well, we don't want it in our backyard, but then we have to think about the longer term impacts and consequences about who, and at the end of the day, it impacts all of us. It impacts every single person. But those who it impacts the most are the most vulnerable. And so that's why we have such high asthma rates, among other things. And so we have to kind of shift our lens of thinking here and say, well, what I do here actually does have an impact for someone else. And it also impacts me in the long run as well.
Thanks, Wildaliz. That's great advice. And thanks to all of you who really pushing for these green collar jobs, as Brent mentioned. So we have 7 minutes left. Why don't I didn't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists before I can give the closing statement? And then if people wanted to stay on for a few minutes extra, they could.
Melissa, I'd like to just make a comment, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Let me tell us, my organization's Partners in Healthy Communities, and I feel like it's Old Home Week because I know so many of you, and I apologize. I came in late and I've been multitasking, and I'm not really good at that. I put in the chat box Green for All and Waterworks. They did a huge study. Van Jones did a huge study several years ago on the economic impact of rebuilding our water infrastructure. And it's something like 1.95 million jobs, $265 billion, $85 billion of new money added to our economy. And I'm in New London, and we're rebranding New London as Renaissance City, the crossroads of arts and technology. And New London's going to be the gateway to the last Green Valley. I'm working on my PhD in BS, storytelling. Environmental justice is economic diversity using the watershed approach. So I'd like to work with each and every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bud. Thanks for all your work and for your info here. We have some questions for people looking for connections in those some specific towns and cities. What we can do is if you wanted to email me, I can connect you with try to find some people in those cities or towns that we work with. And my email is, I'll actually put that in the chat. I'll write that here so you guys have it. And if you have anything else to add or questions after, feel free to email me too anytime. And then one of the other questions was, and it's a great one, where was it? It was talking about continuing, what do we do? EJ Coalition in Connecticut continues these talks monthly. Cyril May asked that. One thing, and Alex talked about it a little bit, was the Governor's Council on Climate Change. They're doing a lot of work on environmental justice, trying to get that into the recommendations that will go to the governor across all cross sectors of everything that we're working on, whether it be resiliency, adaptation, our electricity grids, solar, everything. So that's one way that you can get involved in. If you sign up on our website for our activist email alerts, we'll let you know when you can weigh in on those issues. But it is something we're looking at the New York model as well. There is an environmental justice section of Connecticut's Department of Energy Environmental Protection, but it seems like New York has taken it a step further. So we're going to see how they do with their work that was just passed this year. Governor just signed it. Takes effect in 2020. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on that. And let me check for other questions here. Mostly information, so thank you. I don't see any other questions. So what I'll do is I'll wrap up, and maybe we can throw one more question to our panelists. But I just wanted to mention that, again, this is recorded and it will be on our Stay Engaged page. So that's, again, savethesound.org/stay engaged. And we'll also email this recording out to you all again, so you can share it with your friends and networks. And our film club, this has been an exciting experiment that really took off. We've had, I can't even count now how many environmental film clubs we've had, but they've been a success. So we're going to continue to do them. We do films from around the world and connect it back to the Long Island Sound region, which really makes a nice network and makes the world feel a lot smaller. We're all working towards the same thing. And you can find all those film club events, all of our webinars and our online activities on that Stay Engaged page. And then while you're on the website, you'll notice a pretty little yellow button that says donate. It's a hard time for everyone right now, but if you do have the ability to help out, we really appreciate it. We couldn't do this work without you guys, and none of us could. So we really appreciate any help that you could give us. So I just wanted to leave it, if people have to leave, that's totally okay. But I wanted to ask one more question because, again, it brings it back to the grassroots effort. And I wanted to ask our panelists for a quick response to this. What do you think the best way that people can get involved to make change in their communities? I'll just throw that out there. If anybody had any.
I would say definitely, if you have an idea, run with it. You know, form a group. If a group it does not already exist, and get together, draw up a plan, do it. I think it's testament to the amazing work that Majora was able to do. She had an idea and she ran with it. And also connect with your elected officials, whether that's at the town level or at the state level. That's also really important as well. Put together a campaign.
Great. Great advice, Wildaliz. Thank you. Go ahead, Brent.
Thank you. Sorry. I would say, just broadly speaking, there are many different paths one can take, but I would encourage patience, taking the time to build a strong foundation of awareness, to learn more about the issue, especially on the local levels, that the issues on the local levels that are intriguing to you or motivating to you, and things that you're concerned about. But I would also share that advice to organizations, both on the state level and on the local level, to exercise some patience and a bit of curiosity, because it's important that there's a level of community engagement and approach to community engagement that fully considers the community's voice in this work, right? So, you know, I may say, you know, we need to green this vacant lot, and we need to transform it into an area where people can sit. But the community may feel that I'm imposing my will without providing an opportunity for an equitable approach to decision making and exploring what space a green space can actually be, and other things, right? Whether we're talking about a green economy or a Green New Deal, et cetera. That we exercise a great deal of patience in our approach, so that we're building on foundational knowledge and encouraging and developing people to not only be engaged, but to endure and to have a level of resilience, because they have a strong foundation and it's been carefully handled and approached.
Thanks, Brent. Great advice. Any other panelists want to jump in?
And I'd like to add too that we're all busy, and I think we're all overstimulated with, you know, social media and activities, and that people should be realistic that not everyone is interested or has the time to go spend a full day Saturday volunteering at a site, but there's a lot of great organizations out there that have smaller opportunities, and that something as little as calling a local representative or writing a letter can have big impacts on a project. That if people aren't hearing from their constituents or hearing what your concerns are or what you want to see done, the change isn't going to happen. And don't feel like because you can't, you know, volunteer 3 weeks out of the month that your impact isn't important too.
It's great advice. I think the biggest message is if we don't speak up, nothing will happen. They won't know what we want. So our representatives definitely need to hear from us at every level. Local level, we forget our municipal level as an important place to start. And as Brent mentioned, I mean, or one of the panelists mentioned that, you know, we are overstimulated, and it's easy to be the keyboard warrior and repost memes on Facebook, but to actually get your hands dirty and do something is so rewarding. So I urge everybody to check in with their local town, city, and then reach out to your reps. Any panelists have any final thoughts before we wrap up? Oh, well, I want to thank everybody. All of our panelists were amazing. Thank you all for joining us. This was a great discussion, and I think we do need to continue this. So we will keep working at this, and you all keep staying engaged. So thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great 4th of July. Bye.
Thank you.